Archaeology News, the news you can trust.
For our first story, as we all know very well, archaeology is not about finding treasure. But when we do find some, ain't nothing wrong with that. And if that treasure belonged to royalty, even better.
It's Her Royal Highness's matched luggage!
What?
Her Royal Highness's matched luggage!
So for this story, we are going to the main cathedral of Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. Now, if you've ever been to Vilnius, you'll know that the medieval cathedral dominates the city center skyline, projecting an ancientness that even its 18th century medieval glow-up couldn't cover, and it makes the Baroque city around it feel young.
And as I always say, if it's not Baroque, don't fix it.
Many of the kings, queens, and dukes were buried there, and little known today, tiny Lithuania was once at the center of a vast empire, merged as it was with Poland from the 14th to the 18th centuries, first in a personal union underneath the king, and then in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. That glorious history was all a distant memory in 1931, when severe flooding swept through the city and flooded the crypts, exposing some of the bodies and a lot of bling, as back in the day, royals were specially decked out in custom jewels for their burials. However, just 8 years later in 1939, World War II was looming. The USSR had just signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, dividing up Eastern and Central Europe to spheres of influence, and Lithuania was within the USSR's. Fearing the imminent Soviet invasion, the church officials hid some of these jewels in the bowels of the church. And this fact was not forgotten, but exactly where they hid the jewels was. Or maybe not. There is rumor that some of the church officials knew of the hiding place, but under Soviet occupation they were reluctant to tell anyone, as the Soviets' attitude towards royalty and history and religion was well known. Anyway, rumors about the hidden riches circulated over the years, especially after the fall of communism in the 1990s, until 2024, when, for reasons unclear to me, there was a renewed push to find the hidden jewels. Officials from the church like Archbishop Gintaras Grušas and from the Lithuanian Department of Cultural Heritage agreed to collaborate in the search, consulting archival documents, interwar schematics, and eyewitness accounts. The big breakthrough came on December 16, 2024, when an endoscopic camera was put in between a little gap created by a loose brick in the crypt. And that revealed a cavity behind the wall. And sure enough, when researchers opened that wall, there were the royal regalia, still wrapped in newspaper dated September 7, 1939. From this hiding place, they pulled rings, crowns, orbs, scepters, golden chains, and all sorts of riches fit for royal burials from some of the biggest names in Lithuanian history. For example, there was the crown and rings of King Alexander Jagiellon, and sorry for my pronunciation, or the orb and scepter of Queen Barbara Radziwiłł, whose scandalous secret marriage to King Sigismund II Augustus lasted only a few months when she died of cancer. All in all, 59 artifacts were recovered, heralded as historical treasures exemplifying Lithuania's tradition of statehood, a message aimed squarely at Russia, which would definitely be interested in getting its former dominions back in the fold. However, as you know, in archaeology, there is always a catfight. So there were a few dramas here. First, an art historian and restorer, Saulius Padaris, had claimed to have located the regalia, its hiding spot, in August 2024, 3 months before they were eventually discovered in December. However, the church and the Department of Cultural Heritage mutually agreed to exclude him from further involvement, as he had a previous conviction for purchasing looted artifacts. The associated scandal of having involved this man, who then cried foul, led the church to expedite its search, and actually locate and extract the regalia from the wall without anyone from the Department of Cultural Heritage actually present, and therefore probably no archaeologists there, which may have actually constituted a crime. The church has admitted to its mistake, probably a breach of the law, and anyway, the sort of good vibes from having found the long-lost regalia has outweighed any of the cloud of scandal surrounding it. So there probably won't be any charges or legal action taken. Next up, remains of a 3,000-year-old city discovered in China. Now, we all know China's old, but what we mean when we say China actually grew over time.
Let's say China. 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 China.
For example, the Shang dynasty, which lasted about 600 years starting in 1600 BC, was actually the first dynasty to be archaeologically and historically confirmed. However, what is known as China was much smaller then than it is today. But the discovery of a 3,000-year-old city far outside this zone speaks to Chinese influence well to the south. For this story, we are going to the archaeological site of Niuluchong, which is in the southern Guangxi province near the city of Guilin. You've probably never heard of this area, but you very likely have seen it, as it's famous for its beautiful karst peaks, which are featured in ancient Chinese paintings, in movies, and even on Chinese banknotes. Now, in a rural area outside of the city a couple years ago in 2022, some construction workers were busy preparing the site for new housing when they started to find pottery and other archaeological remains. So the archaeologists were called and rushed in to see what they could find. And naturally, this meant work began in 2024. The site was large at nearly 76,000 square feet or 23,000 square meters and included defensive walls and moats, intact structural walls, pottery, stone tools, post holes, and ash pits. There were small organic remains like charred grains of rice, and even a marquee find of what is believed to be a heavily corroded bronze sword. Now, this region, which I visited a few times, is known for its patchwork of minority peoples and their distinct cultures. These ladies here have never before cut their hair. And in ancient times, it was referred to as Linyan and was even then known to be inhabited by the Baiyue, Bai meaning 100, a collection of various ethnic groups. So what isn't totally clear to me is if this was actually a Shang site or was a Baiyue site which was influenced by the Shang court to the north. Work processing the finds is ongoing, so we'll probably know more in the coming years. However, what is clear is this is a major development for pushing back the timeline of urbanism in southern China. And it is even claimed that the site is the beginning of the Maritime Silk Road, a trade route to complement the more well-known terrestrial Silk Road, which I'm sure you've heard of. Now, I didn't think the Maritime Silk Road got going until hundreds of years after this site was abandoned, but hey, what do I know? And finally, another Viking story, because who doesn't love the Vikings? Now, most people think of the Vikings as seagoing voyagers who left their homelands in Scandinavia and traveled to places like Britain, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and even L'Anse-aux-Meadows in Canada. However, they also went east, making it to Russia, Ukraine, Constantinople, and even Baghdad. And they had a lot of cultural influence, much of this overlooked today, on places like Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, etc., and also certainly had an impact on the gene pool there. We saw this a few weeks back in my site visit to Bergen and the little history about Harald Hardrada. It's for this reason, both trade and pillaging eastward, that amazingly, Buddhas have been found on medieval sites in Sweden. Anyway, there are a few Viking-era artifacts in Ukraine, one from Kiev and two from the northern Cherniv region, which have confounded archaeologists. These are stone discs 6.5 to 7.5 centimeters or 2.5 to 3 inches in diameter, with holes in the middle, concentric circles, radial lines, and other markings. They are made from pyrophyllite, a shiny, soft, and easy-to-process mineral used for many industrial purposes at the time. No one was really sure what these things were used for, with guesses ranging from sharpeners to calendars to something to do with jewelry. However, a new study suggests a pretty convincing hypothesis. The authors compared these items to similar objects found in Poland and Greenland made of wood and whalebone, which have been described as navigational. The idea is that these are navigational tools, solar compasses to be exact. That hole in the middle is actually a space for placing a gnomon, which is that part of a sundial that casts a shadow. The other aspects, the radial and concentric lines, those would serve as they do on a compass. And here's where using such a soft, lustrous stone would have been beneficial, as it could have been temporarily marked with charcoal or chalk, or even etched with those gnomic lines that signify direction, like on a map or a globe. And on an actual navigational tool, these lines would have had to shift as the user moved. And that's why the ability to etch stuff into and erase stuff on this stone would have been very important. However, this isn't totally airtight yet, as other Viking-era solar compasses had permanent lines marked for the equinox and solstice. So perhaps some further research is warranted, like comparing it to more objects, or maybe even some experimental archaeology, trying to recreate this and see if it could actually be used for navigation. Anyway, these researchers made a cool connection, which is why it's so helpful that so many museum and library archives are moving online. It makes this type of research so much easier. Okay, I hope I've helped you navigate through this week's archaeology news. Pun intended. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.